Greetings, everyone. My name is Blessing Kumbu. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the BSc Horizon. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about the Department of Biology. I mean, you all thought biology was all about the human body, but actually it's very diverse. So in today's episode, we have three special guests with us. So we have Prof. Anusia, who is a paleobiologist in the Department of Biological Sciences at UCT, also an expert in the microscopic structure of the bones of extinct and extant vertebrates. And then we have Savannah Anderson, who is a master's student in marine biology, specifically focusing on fish distribution, marine, and also special planning. And then also we have Mohammed Kaji, who is a student development officer in the science faculty and also a PhD student in freshwater biology. How are you guys today?
Good, thank you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so firstly, I would like to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules for us to have this conversation. I was trying to think of a nice icebreaker question for people in the Department of Biology. But then I thought, okay, since you are in marine biology and this is paleo, so I think we'll have different icebreaker questions. So maybe if you can start with Prof. Anusia. What is your favorite fossil and why?
Well, it has to be my PhD material that I worked on. And from South Africa, I have two favorite dinosaurs. One is Syntacus rhodesiensis. And in fact, I have a paper in Nature coming out exactly on why it's my favorite dinosaur. And the other one is Mesospondylus carinatus, which is also a dinosaur found commonly in South Africa. So I do have two favorite dinosaurs, and of course I love birds. So I have many birds that I like, but I particularly like the secretary bird.
Okay, cool. And maybe if you can pose it to Mohammed and Savannah, what is your favorite fish? What does it do, and why is it your favorite?
Such a good question. You go first.
Tricky for me to answer. So I'm a freshwater biologist and I work on freshwater fish. So that's specific to river systems. But in my soul, deep down within, I love the ocean. And I always wanted to be someone that works on whales. So my favorite animal in the world is an orca or killer whale. And then when it comes to fish, none of them in my mind will ever live up to the coolness of an orca.
I'm so offended.
But that causes a lot of issues in my field because I feel like I'm a sellout to the rest of the freshwater community, as my favorite animal in the world is actually a marine species. And it's a whale, not a fish.
And it's a mammal, yes.
Yeah.
And then you, Savannah?
I mean, like, I have so many favorite fish. I could go on and on and on about fish. It's literally my entire life. But last year I worked on coelacanths, and learning about coelacanths was incredible. And I was lucky enough to go on a expedition and send an ROV down, which is like an underwater video camera, and see them like in person, which was incredible. So yeah, coelacanths definitely take the cake.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So maybe as we start this podcast, maybe you can start with Prof. Anusia. So like, what is paleo? Like, what is it about, and why should people come into the field?
So paleontology is very fascinating because it allows one to understand the biodiversity of the past. So as a biologist, I feel that when we look around us and we see this incredible biodiversity of our planet, we have to realize that all that we see is only at the tip of the iceberg. It's really a very small percentage of all that ever lived. If you want to understand the true biodiversity of the planet, you have to go into the fossil record. And when you go into the fossil record and find the remains of extinct animals, you know you are dealing with organisms that lived in the past. But when you try to reconstruct them as once living animals, you're then working in the area of paleobiology. So for example, if you find dinosaur bones, they're just bones of dead animals. But if you study the microscopic structure of their bones and reconstruct what they were like, how old they were, how did they live, were they affected by environments, all of that gives us information about the biology of the animal, and we kind of breathe life into these bones.
I think that's pretty cool because I think there's a quote that says, we learn a lot from the past. So definitely, I think that's pretty cool. And then while we're on that, because I think a lot of people, they just imagine biology as like studying about the human body. So maybe do you mind giving like a brief overview of like what exactly is under biological sciences? Because I think there's a misconception, because myself coming from matric to university, I was like, oh, biology, it's about the human body. And then when I got it, it's like, oh, there is marine bio, there's this. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So like, what is under biological sciences, just as a brief overview?
So biology is really an umbrella topic. It's extremely big. It's very wide. There are many different disciplines within biology. And as you just mentioned, you can study human biology, you can study fish biology, you can study paleobiology. There are many, many different disciplines underneath the subject of biology. But what it encompasses is the study of how things work, how things function in a body, in a living animal. And in the case of paleobiology, we have animals that have died, but we try to reconstruct how they once lived. So it's really how organisms function and how do they function within an ecosystem. So that's very important. It's not just an animal functioning, but functioning within an ecosystem.
Okay. Maybe if I can take it to Muhammad, if you can think back, I know it's a long time, to matric.
Oh, not that old.
That's crazy.
So what type of a student were you, and how did that sort of like influence you doing bio in undergrad?
Yeah, that's a great question, Blessing. So I mean, I think we were chatting about this just before we started recording. I obviously struggled with ADHD as a student, so I wasn't the best student out there. I loved to learn, but I hated to study. And I was kind of more interested in playing sports and watching movies and hanging out with my friends. I think where life kind of changed for me was in grade 10, I encountered my first life sciences teacher. So in South Africa, you move from natural science, which is for grade 8s and 9s, into life sciences, which is for grade 10s to matric. And my life sciences teacher, Mr. Ahmad, was just incredible. Truly, he loved the subject. You could feel his passion in every class that you attended. And I think it inspired me to actually kind of start taking his subject seriously. And it was the first time in my life someone came up to me and said, I think you're really good at biology. You should take it more seriously. And I think it was someone instilling the belief in me that I was good at something that forced me to concentrate a little bit more. He moved me to the front of the class and banned me from talking to my friends, and that kind of helped a little bit. But by the end of grade 10, I was pretty certain in the back of my mind that I really loved science. Physical science and chemistry, not as much, but life sciences just clicked. And I think a lot of it comes down to the passion of an educator that just goes above and beyond what was required from the curriculum. And I mean, we got to do some incredible things at the high school that I went to, where, you know, we'd go every year on a field camp to the Drakensberg and learn about ecology, and we did like river studies. We were often going out on day trips to the caves around Johannesburg, to the Cradle of Humankind, for example. And all of that just made me think that this is such an incredible thing to be learning about. And then I think when life really changed for me, and I knew this was something I was definitely going to pursue, was in 2010, during the FIFA World Cup that was here. I was in Durban to watch a game, and I managed to convince my parents to let me do a scuba diving course. And taking that first breath underwater and seeing all of the incredible life that exists below the surface. I think as I came up from the water that day, I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it's strange because you bounce between, okay, maybe I don't want to, maybe I want to focus on being a lawyer, maybe I should be a doctor. And then you're like, oh, what about being a pilot? I'm sure that would be really cool. But I think my love for science and for wanting to just explore the natural world was always there. And I'm grateful for it. I think it's shaped my entire existence after grade 10.
I think that's pretty cool, because I also think like when you're in high school, if you have one teacher like that says like you've got the potential, I think that's pretty cool, because like it inspires you to strive for more. So Savannah, how was your experience? Like what type of a student were you in matric, and how did that sort of shape what you did in undergrad?
Well, in high school in general, I've always kind of been other people called me a teacher's pet. which I wasn't really fond of, but I was a very dedicated student and always a very enthusiastic student, and that definitely followed through to like my university career. Very similarly to Mo, I had one bio teacher in grade 10, and again, she was also incredibly passionate, and she was a little bit hard on me in the sense that like she would shout at me when I spoke to my friends in class, and also moved me to the front of the class, so very similar. But I always kind of knew that I loved the ocean. I very much get that from my dad. He loves the ocean, and it's very much like I always say he's got salt water in his veins, because that's just kind of the person that he is. And so I definitely kind of absorbed that love from him. And then I grew up in Joburg, but whenever we'd go on holiday to like Durban or Cape Town, I was always by the sea. I couldn't get enough of it. And always asking questions. And, you know, my dad has like a whole bookshelf of fish books, which I now have. And I would like just sit and read through them constantly. So that's kind of where the love came from. And then biology in general just continued to fascinate me. Like throughout high school, I quite literally read the CAPS textbook in matric from front cover to back cover, like all the way through, which my friends thought I was crazy for, but I couldn't get enough of the material. And then coming into UCT, it was a bit of a coin toss exactly what I wanted to do, but I settled on like ocean and atmospheric sciences, so just broadly oceanography and marine biology. And for a while, like first and second year, I was still a bit kind of wobbly on exactly where I wanted to go. But then in third year, I took a course on marine resources, and it focused broadly on like fish and fisheries and fish biology. And I've just like it was the first time I'd done a course where I actually could not get enough of the information, and I just wanted to know everything. I was reading all the extra material. I was asking for more than that and doing my own research on the side, and that really like that's where things like changed and what put me where I am now. And yeah, fish have become my whole life.
I think that's pretty cool. So maybe while you're on that, if I can take it back to Prof. So I think a lot of students that get enrolled for a BSc, we always have this sort of like, what exactly do I want to do? Like, do I want to do bio? Do I want to do anatomy? Do I want to do biochemistry? So if you can think back to when you were young, how did you know that paleo was the pathway for you? And like, what is your advice to science students on like, how do you get to decide what to do after undergrad?
That's a very interesting question. So most people think that when you're a professional now, you knew all the time that that's what you want to be. But in truth, most of us don't know this. I mean, I certainly didn't come to university with the intention of being a paleobiologist. I came to the university wanting to be a science teacher. And I loved biology. I always knew I loved biology as a young schoolgirl. I love science. I love mathematics. So I knew that I was in science. And this was quite counter to everyone else in my family who were all doing either law or were teachers or were in medicine, you know, a typical middle class kind of background. And everyone else was doing that. And I wanted to be a scientist. In fact, I wanted to be a science teacher. I never thought of myself as a scientist. And I came to university and I just loved it. I mean, of course, we're talking about way back then.
Yes.
So it's, 1980s, late 1980s. And it's during the apartheid days. And it was extremely difficult. I went to the University of Witwatersrand and I struggled. It was very difficult for me to cope in the beginning because of all the disadvantages that I had from the schools that I came. And suddenly now, you're at a university, but the playing fields were not level. But I worked really hard and I managed somehow. I coped. And every year I got better. And as I engaged with the curriculum, I enjoyed it even more. By the time I came to third year, I realized that I really loved biology, and I knew that I wanted to study in biology, zoology particularly. I mean, I did botany as well, but I loved zoology. And then in my third year, like Savannah, in my third year, I did one module in paleontology. And suddenly my world opened. And I realized that there was this field which I knew nothing about. But I should say one thing, that as a black person trying to attend a historically white university, I needed what was called ministerial consent. And one of the ways you can get into a historically white university is by saying that the course that you wanted to study is not available at this ethnic university, which was Durban-Westville. And for me, it was that I wanted to study paleoanthropology. Because at that time, of course, Philip Tobias was finding all the fossils from the cradle of humankind. There was this discovery of Australopithecus, and it was really an amazing time. And there was lots of coverage in the news media, but only WITS was offering a degree or even courses in paleoanthropology. So when I applied for ministerial consent, I said I wanted to study paleoanthropology. Can you believe it? And it's just quite it's quite surreal that I actually ended up being a paleobiologist, and I almost ended up being a paleoanthropologist because I loved the field. And in my third year, when I took this course in paleontology, I knew I could either study animal side or including humans, or if I specialize only on dinosaurs. But at that point, I still wasn't sure that I wanted to be a paleobiologist. I still was insisting that I wanted to be a science teacher. So I did my honors, and again, I took a module in paleontology and loved it, absolutely loved it. And then I thought, okay, now what do I do? Do I go into master's or do I continue and do my teacher's diploma? But I had a bursary for a teacher's diploma, and I did my teacher's diploma, so I am a qualified teacher. And while I was in Natal at the University of Durban-Westville, where I did my higher diploma in education, I actually continued to read about paleontology. I loved the field, and the curriculum for the teacher's diploma was so relaxed that I had so much free time that I spent all my extra time reading about paleontology. And so by the time I finished that diploma, I knew that I wanted to come back to university and study paleontology. And from that time onwards, I realized that this is where my career path was. And I came back, and instead of teaching, I actually registered for a master's in science and specializing in paleobiology.
Okay. I think, yeah, that's a very important point that you raised, because as when you look at professors, like, oh, definitely she knew what she wanted to do from a young age. And I think the thing with the BSc is that as you take a step further, that's when you discover what to do. It's scary from our side because we think we need to have it all figured out now, but then we don't understand that, okay, it's one step at a time. You do honors, then you're going to see where you're going to end up at, and that's how you sort of like build your way up to now. So I think if I can shift it to you guys, if you can think about, I know from matric to undergrad, it's a big jump in terms of transitioning. So like, how was the transition from undergrad to postgrad for you guys?
Maybe you go first, Savannah?
Okay, cool. So I was thinking about this, and for me, undergrad, as it was very interesting. I started undergrad in 2020, and so I had 3 or 4 very nice, fun months on campus, and then it was lockdown, shut down, and it was goodbye, you are doing university at home from now on. And then I only really came back towards kind of the second semester and third year. But as a whole, I would say that undergrad very much matched the structure of matric. And so it was kind of easy to slot in, you know, you had your modules and your courses and your weekly assignments and exams. And that was very familiar in terms of structure. And then honors pretty much followed the same path. There was a little bit more independence injected into the course, and you're kind of expected to do your thesis on the side, like a miniature thesis for honors, and then you take breaks and you choose your own modules. So the classes are smaller, but you still have the same structure of here's your module for the week, and at the end of the week you do an assignment. The big jump was from honors to masters, where I'm not doing a coursework master's, so I don't take any classes or modules. I'm doing a dissertation only. So that means for 2 years, I have an open-ended task. And at the end of those 2 years, I have to submit a thesis. So initially, like, it just seemed like a gigantic task to take on. So like the biggest challenge for me was like the jump was that lack of structure. And instead of someone telling you like an announcement on like Vula or Amatuba saying you have a module, you have a course, here's your course schedule, it was now all of a sudden like, okay, Savannah, like you have to do that for yourself. You have to set up your own schedule, your own calendar. You have to give yourself like deadlines. Like, sure, I have these large deadlines of this is when your draft needs to be in, and you sit with your supervisor and you come up with like a general time frame of when everything needs to be done. But then you still have like, okay, 6 months for your introduction. In those 6 months, you still have to control how you're going to do things. And each day you have to make sure that you're working towards this very large goal.
That is scary.
It is scary. And I mean, I have to be honest, it hasn't been easy. I have had a few, I'd say, wobbles this year, and one quite recently where it just kind of felt like I looked at, I mean, we're in November now. And I looked at the year that had gone past and I was like, what have I done? You know, and I kind of had this like really like impending doom kind of, and I do suffer, and I think a lot of people in academia do, from imposter syndrome. And it was kind of like, can I do this? You know, like, am I working enough? Like, you know, have I done enough this year? But like through talking to other people in my lab, like Mo, who's always a fantastic support to me, and my parents and my supervisor, just kind of reminding myself that, yes, I have this deadline, which is at the end of next year. But right now, all I can control is what I do today and this week. And just focusing on that, like the daily tasks that I can achieve. Like, it sounds silly, but from when I was very young, like I'm quite an anxious person. So my parents have been aware of this for a long time. And my mom always used to say to me, because I can go down these like, I don't know, rabbit holes of like future anxiety and worry about what's to come. And my mom would always say to me, like, how do you eat an elephant? And it's one bite at a time. You know, you can't just complete a task all in one go. You have to constantly chip away. And it's like through that like incremental progress that you'll get there.
I think that's definitely true, because I feel like in science, there is imposter syndrome, because I feel like for most science students, it's all about grades, it's all about like intellect. And I think a lot of people do suffer from understanding that it's like one step at a time, you can never complete it. It's all like those small deadlines until you reach the end.
But we're also not like, I think there's a limit in the conversations we have with one another. Like in hearing, you know, like Mo said to me, he had imposter syndrome. And just him at like telling me that, well, I was like, oh my God, it's not just me, you know? And like, I look up to him because he's done his PhD, and that's incredible. And he's like a higher level than I am. And, you know, just hearing people around you also like kind of validate your experience and share the same sort of feelings. Like, I think conversations like that are really beneficial, because then you don't feel so alone.
No, definitely. I feel like in science, you always have this thing like, you look at someone like, I'm sure they have it under control.
Exactly.
And you don't know, they're just having a mental breakdown just as you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did you find it, the jump from undergrad to postgrad?
Yeah, I in keeping with the theme of what Savannah was saying, I always like to start by telling my first year story, because I think it hopefully lets people listening at home and other undergraduate students understand that failure is not the end of the road, and actually failing a course is not necessarily you being a failure in life. So I had a kind of mixed undergrad experience. My first year at UCT was absolutely wild. I hope my mom will never see this, but I did all the haram things possible in first year, and as a result I failed chemistry 1000. I DPR stats 1007, and I got a sup for math that I had to pass in order to not be excluded. And that was my first year experience. And I think I remember going home at the start of December and expecting my parents to be really angry, because I'd never failed anything in my life. I was always, first or second in my class, and that was who I was. And they weren't angry. They were like quietly disappointed and trying to be supportive.
That's worse.
And so they were kind of sad and saying, okay, it's fine. You'll be better next year. You got to just, that was worse than if they were angry because I felt like such a failure. And I think in that December period, I made a deal with myself. I said, you're not going to fail another course again. And I spent the time, and I think a lot of students, when they fail, then that becomes what they think they are. And I, just by luck, ended up spending that December thinking about what did I do wrong this year that led me to this? And unfortunately, I realized I'd had like the slightly incorrect friend circle who were a little bit too social and a little bit more party oriented. And I was trying to be someone that I wasn't to fit in with that group. And so I came back in second year and realized I had to change my life just slightly. I needed to stop going out. I needed to stop partying. And I needed to start doing a little bit more to get to campus each day, make sure I was in every lecture. And I think that sort of experience meant I also then, similar to what Anusia was saying, improved year on year in my academics. And so by the time I got to third year, I felt like I was fighting for distinctions rather than just trying to pass courses. And that was the first time in my life where I went, oh, maybe I am smart enough to do something in science. Because until that point, the imposter syndrome was really hard, especially after first year, when you think like, okay, I just need to get this degree and then run as far away from UCT as I can. And so in third year, I didn't even think about it for 1 second. It was the first time when I was in third year that they told us about honors, and I was like, oh, maybe I could possibly sneak in. And in the end, I ended up, doing quite well in third year and getting into honors. And so I think honors was the first year where I felt like I was becoming a scientist, or I felt like I was a bit of an academic, and actually really started loving the coursework for the first time in honors, where I felt like the lecturers treated you more like an equal. You could ask questions. It was more discussion oriented. The actual transition to postgrad studies for me was, I think, very different compared to other people. So I finished honors. And then I had a job at a environmental consulting company working in the climate change adaptation sphere. So that's helping countries to adapt to the impacts of climate change. And then my family went into a sort of financial crisis and I had to move back to Johannesburg. And so I moved back to Joburg and I was a high school teacher for 2 years. And so by the time I'd come back to UCT, this was probably 2018, 2019, I'd had like 3 years of work experience. I dealt with the family financial crisis and I felt a lot more settled in who I was as a person. And so I think, Savannah, I'm not sure you went straight from honors into masters.
Yeah.
And I think that can be quite difficult because you've got to transition very quickly and you're still quite young. I started my masters at, I think I was 25 years old, which I think I felt a lot more grounded. My supervisor was the same supervisor I had in honors, and he was excited that I was back. And so my transition felt a little bit easier. But what I realized in that transition was I actually loved studying. And the thing that changed was when you get to master's and PhD level, if you are doing a thesis master's or thesis or PhD, you don't have to write exams ever again.
That's so cool.
And so there's hope for the people out there to know that you get to a point where you will never have to sit down and write an exam.
Yeah.
And I think that meant that I was learning things without the stress and the pressure of, oh my God, what happens if I fail?
Yeah.
And as a result, I wasted so much time in my master's just listening to lectures that were not related to my course. And I would often spend hours and hours listening to psychology lectures or politics lectures or philosophy lectures just because I was excited to learn these new things. And then I'd obviously bore all of my lab mates with what I'd learned because I had to tell them about it.
I mean, to be fair, it's always interesting to do something unrelated, but when you have to do something related to your course, like, ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so my love for biology has merged a little bit in that it is now the work that I do. And the fun stuff is getting to be a pretend scientist in other fields.
Yeah.
And my most recent one is anthropology. I've absolutely fallen in love with anthropology and I can't get enough of learning about it. But I think that transition of getting that freedom, and obviously for me also getting diagnosed with ADHD and getting medicated, meant that I figured out a system that works for me. And I think that's a lot about what postgrad is what is the system that helps you to be the most productive to get your work done? Are you a daytime worker or a nighttime worker? Do you need to be medicated in order to concentrate? Do you work better alone in your room or in an office with other people doing similar things? And I think figuring that out over the first year or so and realizing I just love science, I love learning, I love the process of research. I think that was really empowering. And then along that journey, figuring out what do you need to become a good scientist or someone whose work is at least acceptable. And so I think in that space, figuring out, okay, you've got to learn how to write really well and really quickly and concisely, so that your writing is clear and that you communicate your science well. You've got to develop your skills in statistical science. And I think the undergrads of today are a lot more luckier than we were because it wasn't compulsory for us to do stats. But nowadays, most people coming through a BSc will do at least 2 years of statistics.
You said that with malice.
It's a trauma I'll never forget. In history.
But those skills are extremely important.
Exactly.
Your writing skills, your statistical skills, and then those core skills that are required to be a scientist. Are you curious? Are you asking questions? Can you follow the scientific method properly?
Yeah.
Those are all skills that then come together to help you along your postgrad journey.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. But I want to also add that, those are the certainly core skills one needs, but there are other things that you can develop, and such as time management and project management. And one of the things that Savannah mentioned was, how do you eat an elephant? It's bit by bit.
Yeah.
But how do you structure your 3 years? You know that you have 3 years to finish a PhD. So planning is really very, very important. And setting yourself reasonable goals. So you know that in the first 3 months, I'm going to do this. In the next 3 months, I'm going to do this. And if you actually are good about checking your progress and how you're actually meeting those goals, it's really important, because if you're able to see how you are progressing, you can adjust, you can make your small adjustments, and then you find that you're able to finish in time. Often we find that students sometimes, instead of taking 3 years, they take 5 years to finish a PhD. And usually it's because they haven't managed their time properly. And I think, understanding your time, your flow of your time, and how you work. And I certainly agree, Mo, it's really important that as a scientist, you don't only have a blinkered approach and only work on what your field is about. I mean, it's really important to think about bigger things, to look beyond your field, to be interested in other things. And that's what's enriching about being a scientist, I think.
Maybe if I can add on to that, one of the most important skills that I had to develop was communication with your supervisors.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So I'm sure Nusya will agree. There's nothing worse than a student that drops off the radar and you don't know where they are, what's going on with them.
I have been that student.
Yeah.
No.
And it's so important, I found, for my own self-management, because I struggle with managing myself and my own time. Communicating regularly with my supervisor, and I set up eventually weekly emails that I would have to send. This is what I did this week, is really important, because your supervisor can help reel you back in if you're going down a rabbit hole, but also can help course correct if you're taking too long on a certain thing. And I think that's the number one thing I would recommend people entering postgrad develop is clear and open communication with your supervisor, especially when things are going badly. Because it's easy to communicate when you're doing a good job, but when things are going badly, having that chat, as difficult as it might be, I think just helps you to solve that problem. It gives your supervisor a clearer understanding of where you are, and it takes a lot of pressure off for the 30 seconds of awkwardness that you've got to go through to admit, hey, I didn't do anything this week. This is what's going on in my life.
It also, I was just going to say, it allows them then to help you.
Exactly.
If you don't ask for help, it's never going to get given. So that just opens the door to saying, like, look, and this is exactly what happened to me. Like, I went through a period where I was plodding along very much like slowly, but it was laborious. I just got stuck. I forgot what I was doing. I'd lost the end goal. And then I went and sat down with my supervisor and I was like, hey, you haven't seen me in a while. Sorry. And he was able to just put everything else into perspective for me. And like, we've been meeting regularly since then. And it really has changed. So it's really good advice, but also don't be too hard on yourself. Like, if you don't do something, I'm really hard on myself, but if you do have a wobble, if you do take a week off or something like that, and you don't meet a deadline or a goal that you've set for yourself, like, it's okay, you'll be fine. Just keep going,
But I think it's really important that from the onset, one sets in your diary regular appointments.
Yeah.
So you say every 2 weeks I will have half an hour meeting with my supervisor.
Yeah.
If things are going well, you still meet your supervisor. If things are not going well, you then have an opportunity to voice what's not going well. But if you have that scheduled appointment in your diary, it's not like a big deal to go in to say, I haven't done anything. But if it's there, you can talk about it. And you can talk about the good things, and you can talk about the things that didn't happen. But it's really important to have that scheduled in your diary. It's like compulsory. And I have, at the moment, 8 students, and I have with each of them half an hour every 2 weeks.
I think what you mentioned, what's being discussed is very important, because I feel like a science degree after undergrad, it's all about like teaching you skills to survive in life, basically. Time management, communicating properly, and utilizing all the resources around you, because I feel like resources are available, help is available, and I feel like mostly science students, they struggle to ask for help because we think you need to know it all. And I think that's quite important, that to communicate properly and clearly and ask for help so that like you can receive it, and also like proper time management and planning well in advance. I think it's important so that if things don't go according to plan, you can sort of like manipulate the plan and also like adjust and improvise. So I think while we're on that, if I can pose a question to you, Prof, how do you then draw the line to whether should you end at honors? Do you need to go to masters? Do you need to go to PhD? Do I need to go all the way to postdoc? Because I feel like for mostly us as undergraduate science students, we always feel lecturers like they're imposing us if we need to go all the way to PhD. And that's sort of scary for us. No. So how do you get to draw the line? Where should you end?
I think it's very much an individual thing. When you do your honors, you will realize whether you are a person that will enjoy research and enjoy this answering questions that are unknown. One of the things that Mo mentioned actually is that, at one point you're learning for an exam. Okay, and suddenly as a postgrad student, you yourself are contributing new knowledge that has never been known before. And that's a really big difference, is that instead of just being a consumer of what's out there, suddenly you are now writing papers about something that is novel, that is new, and that is really very inspiring. I mean, for me, I remember distinctly when I first realized that my work is important because nobody else knew anything about it. I was the first person to discover these things, and I wanted to tell the world about it because it was so important. And I think when you discover that passion for science and this passion for investigating something and contributing to the new knowledge, you yourself will know when to stop. If you find that after you finish honors, you had enough of this, you said, I had enough of it, I'm going to go and work, I need to go and earn some money, and that's it. But if you do a master's degree and you still get inspired by your research, you get motivated about going to work to do your research, then you've got that science bug that wants you to know more and learn more. And I guess it progresses from there onwards. But you will know it. You will know when you need to stop. I mean, there's some people who find that after masters, they don't really enjoy it. The masters itself was a struggle, and they wanted to just get out of it as soon as possible. And once they graduate, they find a job and they're doing something different. But no matter what, I want to say that all science degrees do not have to end with a PhD. You can choose where you stop. But one of the most important things about a science degree is that it equips you with many different things. You learn about how to manage your time. You learn skills, quantitative skills. You learn to do things. You actually learn to think logically. And when you're looking for employment, an employer will see a science degree and know that this is somebody who has managed his time properly or her time properly, and they are capable of delivering on a project because they finished their science degree. So even just a BSc degree is really quite an important skill or quite an important degree to have, because it sets you apart from everyone else that maybe has BA degrees which are not the same level and they don't have the same skills that you as a science student has.
So maybe then as a follow-up on that to all of you, because I feel like another issue to like science students is wondering, am I going to get a job after this degree? What am I going to do with the BSc? So then what would you say are some career like pathways that a BSc opens for you? And then also if you can trim it down to like, if you do, once you've done with marine or paleo, what is available for you in the working field?
So for me, the ideal thing would be that if as a scientist you want to continue to be a scientist, that means that you would need a job where you can actually do your research, and for a person like me, where I'm able to also teach because I love teaching as well. But there are places where you could get a job in a museum environment, for example, where you only do research and you manage collections. Okay, that kind of position is available. But there are also other kinds of positions where you can become a science teacher and you can help develop the next generation of scientists, which is a really, really important thing. And we heard Mo tell us about his inspirational science biology teacher. Savannah had the same thing. And I think teachers are really wonderful people that can inspire the next generation to become what they themselves, or to basically discover their own potential. So there are many different opportunities. And even if you find that you don't end up working as a scientist, there are other jobs. You can become a science communicator. You can work in environmental education. You can work in conservation biology. So there is a lot of scope out there. The jobs are not so readily available. Sometimes you've got to wait for a position to become available. But I think that if you wait long enough, there will be a position that suits you. And I see from my own postgrad students that have come through, whenever they're finishing, they think, oh, what am I going to do next year? What's going to happen? And you know, they do a postdoc. During the postdoc, something materializes and they follow through. So it's not all doom and gloom. I think the jobs are few and far between, but you have to wait it out. And you have to kind of look for the opportunities. And as a science student, you have to sell your skills. There's one thing we don't do very well ourselves is to sell ourselves. So if you're a biologist, if you're a fish biologist, if there's a position becoming available for a biologist in, let's say, a morphologist or evolutionary biologist, as a fish biologist, you sell yourself as an evolutionary biologist, because you don't just work on fish, you're looking at the evolution of the fish in that environment. So one has to learn about how you market yourself, how you sell yourself, and you must be able to say, I can do this job even though my training is not directly aligned to what you are asking for. And I think that is very important.
I mean, definitely, I feel like there's a misconception. I don't think people quite get like how broad and diverse a BSc is, and like the transferable skills that we have that equips you like for literally a lot of things if you want to go into the working place. And I feel like that's sort of like the stigma that needs to be broken down in the future, so that people really understand like how important a BSc is and like how diverse it is. So I just want to ask, maybe for people out there that want to follow like into the research fields that you're currently involved in. So what is there? Why should someone do marine biology? Why should someone do freshwater biology? So sort of like sell it to us, promote it.
I'm gonna do my best elevator pitch here. So I mean, from my perspective, I ended up in freshwater research because that was where the bursary that I was awarded was offered in, and I think that's maybe a more important piece of advice is you can be passionate as I am about killer whales, but you can't be idealistic in saying, I will only do science if I get to work on that whale or on that dinosaur or on that plant. And in my case, I said, look, I'm passionate about whales, but I love science and I love learning. And so you can't be idealistic in saying, I will only do science if I get to work on that whale or on that dinosaur or on that plant. And in my case, I said, look, I'm passionate about whales, but I love science and I love learning. And so freshwater science came to me because that was where the funding was. And I think maybe for a lot of South African or students studying in South Africa, that will be the case. You won't get to choose your dream career. You will choose the thing that gets you your first job or the thing that gets you funding, and you will follow that. Freshwater science, why should you be studying it? I think the simplest answer there is we require water for just about every aspect of our existence. And as a result, understanding the living organisms that exist within these freshwater systems helps us to understand whether the key resource for human existence is in a healthy condition or not. And so I am very excited and fulfilled when I get to do my research, because whilst I am studying fish in freshwater systems, indirectly that knowledge is contributing to our assessment of our natural freshwater resources, allowing government and NGOs and conservation managers to understand, are we respecting and taking care of this resource, which if we mess up could mean the end of our species. And so in that space, maybe this is the propaganda that I will provide. It is probably one of the most important fields within biological science that you can study, because it is so intrinsically linked to drinking water, irrigation of crops, our ability to sustain ourselves as a species, and actually for almost every species out there.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's a good pitch. That is a good pitch.
Yeah, good luck following that.
I've got something cooking.
And then why should we follow your research field, Savannah?
So for me, when I tell people that I'm doing my master's in marine biology, I often get the, oh my gosh, I always wanted to do that when I was a kid. You know, I love whales and dolphins. And, you know, my response is, no, I don't, you know, work with whales or dolphins or sharks or anything like as charismatic and cool as that, you know, from their perspective. And then their brain kind of, I can see they start to like shut down a bit when I start to tell them I work with fish. And I think, you know, I have such a deep love for fish. Like, I know that sounds weird, but I genuinely love them. And they, like, every species, family, like, they're fascinating. I can't get enough about learning about them. And I think there's a huge misconception about fish. Like, people, a lot of people don't even view them as animals, you know, like outside of the academic realm, when I'm just talking to people in general. But specifically for me, I mean, I'm really interested in fisheries management and marine spatial planning and conservation. And that is paramount. If we look at the population growth of people and the need to sustain like humans and the human food production cycle, fish stock management and fish resource management it's imperative. Like, we have to maintain like a continuous food supply. And as we run out of terrestrial agricultural resources, we need to be able to provide people with food. And the ocean is a really good opportunity for that. And for years and years and years, stocks were mismanaged because someone in Britain 100 years ago said the ocean is it's a replenishable resource, it'll never run out. And because one person said that, people act accordingly, and stocks failed. And, you know, in the North Atlantic, there are several stocks of fish, populations and species they're completely gone. And, you know, the recovery of that is, you know, it's not possible anymore. But in South Africa, we have a really unique opportunity where our fisheries are fairly new. I mean, in the way that they've been managed and recognized, they're fairly new. And we have an opportunity as fish biologists and fishery scientists in South Africa to actually make a really big difference at this point now. Like, it's not like you're contributing to a body of work that's oversaturated and you're just kind of putting more, kind of like you're just adding oil to the machine that's already running. Like, we're building the machine. We're changing things as it's happening now. We're able to establish different protocols, and it extends beyond just like, saving fish populations and supplying food for people. It's also about empowering like local fishing communities, and there's a social sciences aspect to it. It's not just about, I don't know, it's not just about like conservation. There's also like a human aspect to it, and kind of decolonizing fisheries in South Africa, which I think is really important, and giving power back to the people that started it in the first place, and communities that have relied on this for generations. So yeah, that was a bit of a waffling pitch.
No,
but
I think those are good pitches. I mean, surely it means standing on business. And I think as aspiring scientists, we aspire to do that. I think like that's really important, because surely for us, we never know, like, there's a deeper meaning to what you guys do. Like, okay, it's probably doing fish, more in the ocean. And then when you get to talk about these things, we see like the importance and the impact, how really like science is really important. So maybe as we are nearing the end of our conversation, I'm going to ask some deep questions, guys. I apologize. So maybe if I can start with Prof. So why do you think representation matters in science, in the context of like having like Black people in science, women in STEM? Why do you think it's important? And then also in closing, maybe then you can tell us, if you look back when you were young, what is one piece of advice that you would say to your younger self?
That is an interesting question. Well, I think representation in science is really important. I think that, for women, for people of color, to see themselves as scientists is important.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't have a role model as a scientist. I mean, I had my family who were, as I mentioned before, were in these other kind of positions, typical middle-class positions, which are teaching, law, medicine, that kind of areas. And for me, it was just a natural thing to become a teacher, because those are the people that I saw and that I looked up to, and I wanted to be like them. But as I became more independent in my thinking and coming to university, I realized that there were other opportunities, but still there was nobody that I could see myself in. I mean, of course, this was in the days of apartheid. There were very few Black people. I mean, even currently, there's still very few Black people in science. And I was just amongst a handful of people that are currently senior in the science field, even in our science faculty at the university. So I think that personally, I wanted to contribute to helping young people understand, especially young people of color, understand that there is a scope for science. And I was very involved in science communication. So in parallel to my academic career, I also have a career in science communication. So from the time I was a student, I was talking to young people about becoming a scientist. And I would go to schools, I would organize lectures, I would go to the public, and I'd organize these things where I tell people about science careers, opportunities of science careers. Like, don't be blinkered, don't just think narrowly, but think about bigger things. Think about, be more ambitious. And I try to instill that in people. And I still do that. I still write for young people. I write books, I write science articles, I do podcasts, I do all kinds of things to encourage people to realize that there are people that can do science, and that anyone can do science. You don't have to be a particular stereotype. You don't have to be a man. You don't have to be a white person. You can be anything you want to be, and you can still be a scientist. And I think that is very important for young people to see themselves as scientists. And that is what we all need to do. And I feel very strongly that every scientist needs to communicate their science to the wider public so that people can understand what it is that scientists do and how science is done. Because as you mentioned before, not many people understand what it is that scientists do. But if we are all talking about our research, if we tell people about what it is that we do, we can inspire the next generation of scientists.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That is good. That is good. That is good. If I can, so I have specific questions for each and every one of you. Cool. So if I can go to Mo, so what is your advice to maybe men of color, should I say males of color, in terms of like maybe to people of color that have like ADHD and them overcoming that and not letting it like become a barrier in terms of like having a career in science. So how can they cope with that and still like not think like they are abnormal, they have this disease, they have this sort of, what is your advice? Because I mean, in the context of like people of color, that's not something that's discussed like in households. Like if I tell my parents I have ADHD, they'll be like, wait, what is that? So like, what is that? What is your advice in terms of that?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Blessing. I'm thinking back to, I went home to visit my mom last month, and the day after I got back, she said something about, you need to stop taking those ADHD and antidepressant medications. They're going to ruin your brain. And it speaks a lot of the stigma that exists within Black and brown households around mental health. And so I think it's something that I actively try to do throughout my day-to-day existence, whether that's interacting with staff members or other colleagues or even undergrad students, is to bring up the fact that I am someone who struggles with mental health and depression, but also is diagnosed with ADHD, as a point of normalizing that it is okay. Because when you look at the data across the world, a large proportion of people working in academia struggle with mental health issues. And whether that's anxiety or depression or ADHD or any of the other disorders that are recognized, it is something that we all struggle with in silence because we like to pretend like it's not a big deal. And so my advice to maybe not even just other males of color who struggle with mental health and specifically ADHD, but anyone struggling with it is that it might sometimes feel crippling and disabling and like it means that you will never be able to achieve as much as your peers. But please believe me when I say that's not the case. With something like ADHD, as much as there are many downsides and many things that you have to work extra hard on, managing your time, remembering your meetings and your tasks and getting work done regularly, there are also many positives. I mean, people with ADHD often have almost superhuman levels of hyperfocus if we are interested in a topic. So when you find that thing that interests you, you will really enter into an incredibly productive space.
Yeah.
We're also like really good at working under pressure. We're very adaptable. We're usually easy to get along with and great work colleagues. And so to understand you might have certain disadvantages, but there are lots of advantages that are sorely needed within the academic space. And also to be honest with the people around you, to let them know that this is what you struggle with. And again, it comes back to what we were speaking about earlier, which is communication with especially with your supervisor, but with your colleagues as well.
Yeah.
And I think back to there were some German researchers that had come down to South Africa to do a project on kelp. And the very first day when we met, we were out at a bar grabbing a drink or at a restaurant grabbing a drink. And I told them, look, I have ADHD. I'm going to be doing my best to help you, but I just wanted to bring that up right at the forefront. And the day that they were leaving, the primary investigator on that project said, I'm so glad you mentioned it to us because it helped us understand your behavior and also how to work around it at times. And obviously, I was a little bit taken aback, but that was a German compliment. And they were saying that
As a German, I can confirm.
they were saying thank you for bringing that to our attention, because we then knew how to work with it. And the project was a great success. We were about to publish that paper. But if I hadn't brought that up, it might have to them come across as me being sloppy in my work or not prioritizing them, whereas some of that behavior just comes out of ADHD. And then obviously the last bit of propaganda specifically to males struggling with mental health is whether that's anxiety or depression or ADHD, to always assess your own behaviors and the way you deal with your mental health through a socio-political lens. And that is, sometimes people who struggle with mental health issues can often turn their anger towards people in society who they may deem to be responsible for it. And especially in modern times, that often gets turned onto women. I don't get opportunities because women are taking all the jobs. Or I'm not getting any dates because women don't want to date men like me. And to analyze your existence in that lens to make sure that you aren't reinforcing marginalization onto other groups of people because of the struggles that you've gone through. And I think it's really important that as men we start speaking about that openly, this idea that we need to push back against some of the misogyny and sexism that we see becoming normalized amongst young men across the world, to always be aware of that and to make sure that we're fighting against it within our own little male bubbles.
Definitely. I think that is great advice to all the men out there. I think it's really important.
Preach.
And then, Savannah, why is it important in a science setting to ensure that inclusivity is enforced? And also, what advice would you give to queer people who maybe feel like they don't belong in science?
I think representation and inclusivity is everything. Obviously, coming in at a more recent time, I do have the privilege of seeing, women in academia, people like Anusia and other people in the department that I've looked up to genuinely. It's incredible to see your career and what you've done, and it's really amazing. And as much as there are those people in those positions, like you said, it's still, there's a long ways to go. And, that applies to seeing more people of color holding higher positions in the department, women of color, and queer people. And there's still, in my opinion, a little bit of a underlying just whiteness to biological sciences specifically, that can definitely, and male whiteness specifically. And I think that needs to be dismantled. That's a long-standing structure of patriarchy and colonialism in South Africa. And one of those conversations that Mo and I could go on for hours about. But seeing people that you can see yourself in means everything. Because if I can't, look to someone who is like me, a queer woman in science, that struggles with mental health or whatever, if I can't look up to someone like that, what that tells me is there is no space for me. A black person looking up and not seeing anyone that looks like them in the department, what that tells them then, it's enforced that you aren't welcome. So inclusivity and representation is absolutely everything. It allows people to see that they have a space. And within the department, not even just seeing yourself somewhere, but fostering community and allowing people to engage with the people around them and in their department. There's so much benefit that I've gained specifically this year from simply just sitting in a lab on the 5th floor in the bio department. That's where Mo and I got really close, and I've met other people in that lab, and it changes everything. Just having a community, talking to other people, other women, other queer women, people like me, and building a community where I can sympathize, I can empathize, and I can also learn more. And I think the bio department really can benefit from more of that, fostering community. It can feel really isolating at times, especially for, I don't know, for me, having had my majority of my university career isolated due to COVID, like going from that then straight back into a master's where, you know, I was at home for a while. It's really important to almost make involvement compulsory. I know that sounds weird, but otherwise you're just fighting a journey alone, you know, and being alone is, that's when things are difficult. You know, it's when you're around other people and, you know, you have the support of your supervisor and your colleagues, that's when you're able to actually get through stuff. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of work to do, and I try in my capacity to change things as much as I can, and I definitely can do more. I think we can always all do more. But yeah, inclusivity and like harboring community is absolutely everything. It's paramount to fostering the next generation of scientists.
I think definitely, because I think one take-home message is that like it does matter inclusivity in science, because I think there's a stigma that scientists are just nerds. They're in the lab, in your white lab coat, don't communicate with anyone. But like at the end of the day, that's not true. We also people at the end of the day. We have a life. And I feel like if you have a community that you belong to, also that's important in terms of like efficiency and also like taking science a step ahead. So as you can see, guys, there are people, they have a life. They're just not scientists in labs, and also really incredible people. So then go do paleo, go do marine, and it's amazing. So thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. I'm pretty sure a lot of undergraduate science students and also maybe people in matric, they're going to really appreciate seeing how you guys have progressed up to this point and all the advices. I think for my side, I've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having this conversation. It's really important.
Yeah, thank you.